Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name's Jeff Thomas, and we've got a very special guest with us today, Kip Miller, who is the principal owner of Eastern Industrial Supplies. We're going to learn all about that, but welcome to the program, Kip.
It is so nice to be with you today and just be able to share a few things about my life.
Well, that's the whole idea, is to just, we were talking before we started recording that I'm gonna go on a limb and say I'm not the only one that listening to this that maybe is running a business who's a little hard-headed and doesn't like to be told what to do. But I love stories and learning from other people's stories and taking those nuggets and trying to apply them to my life. So we're looking forward to a few nuggets from you. But Kip, as we start out, how about just tell us about where you grew up? How many siblings did you have? What was life like in your household growing up?
Yeah, I grew up in a home where both mom and dad were believers. We grew up in Greenville, South Carolina. This is a wonderful place. People say, "Where are you from?" I say, "I'm from Greenville." I said, "Are you native?" And I thought, "Yeah." I never really saw a reason to leave here. Yeah. So dad worked, mom stayed at home. Had two sisters, one older, one younger, and we didn't have a whole lot, but we had a very, very good life.
What was now? How many siblings do you have?
I had two sisters, one older and one younger.
Gotcha. And where are you? Oh, okay. So you're in the middle.
Yeah.
Does that mean you're the peacekeeper, or how did that work?
Well, I don't know. I just learned a lot from my older sister what to say and what not to do, and then
right.
So I was able to be a good middle child.
There you go. That's usually how it works out, I think. Okay. And now, any entrepreneurial bent as a kid? Any paper routes, mowing lawns? Anything you were doing on the entrepreneurial side?
Well, it's interesting you said that because I did both of those things. I just always enjoyed working, and so my dad had bought a Craftsman 28-inch mower that had a folding handle, and I could fold it and put it in my mother's 68 Buick Skylark. And she would drop me off at different places, and I would mow lawns, and it would be a $3 to $5 kind of thing back in those days. And there was a lady that went to our church, and she worked the savings and loan. So she said, "Hey, you can come see me and we'll help open up an account." My mom had said something to her about it, and I just thought it was so cool that I could take my little bit of cash, and they would put it in a great big bank vault. They would protect it, and then they would pay me interest to keep it. So I had a paper. Then I had I mowed lawns, and then I moved into a friend of mine had a paper route, afternoon paper route, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to move on to another job. Would you like to take it over?" And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Well, come ride with me a day." And I guess what I learned from that was, you had to go out and secure new customers. You had to deliver the paper Monday through Friday, the way that the customer wanted it. Some wanted it handed to them, folded in the mailbox, in a wrap. And then on Friday afternoons, you had to go collect money.
Yeah, collections.
Yeah, and then Saturday morning, you went to the newspaper office, you paid your bill, and what you had left over was yours. So I did that for several years, and man, I just always I always preferred to work than anything else. And later in high school, I worked in a shirt factory and did different things. I had my schedule arranged so I could get out early and go to work. Just always, I enjoyed working.
I mean, the paper route is just classic to me.
Yeah.
It's like business 101 for kids, I mean, I think about what you said, right? Sales, custom delivery, you know what I mean? Like customization but the one that everybody tells that always gets me is the collections. Everybody remembers the knocking on the door and trying to collect, and sometimes you don't have 100% collections, right? I mean, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, some of you would go back over and over and over, try to catch people at home, and
Right.
might not collect for 4 weeks. But I don't think I was ever not paid. I think
Yeah.
most everybody would pay back in those days. It was just a matter
Yeah.
of catching them at home.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. So you go off to school. Tell us about those years.
Yeah, so in high school, I never really learned to study. I was focused on work, baseball, cars, girls, that kind of thing. And it came time to graduate and decide what I was going to do with my life. And so, well, maybe I'll go to a college. And it was a local junior college I applied to. And I guess once they saw all my grades and scores, they sent me a letter and said, "Hey, you need to write us an essay and tell us exactly why you want to come to school here."
Huh.
So I thought really long and hard about that. I prayed a lot about it, and I said, "This better be good." And it just kept coming to me over and over, Jeff, to write about being a Christian businessman in an evil and sinful world.
Interesting.
And I didn't know that God was giving me a purpose for my life at that time. I didn't connect those dots till about 10 years later. But I wrote that paper, I sent it in, and I think they just needed additional tuition, so they accepted me. Yeah, so that kind of started at least 2 years. And when you go to a 2 year school, you have to be thinking in your sophomore year, what's next?
Right.
I really felt like I was possibly being called into full-time ministry. And
Oh,
to me at that time, it meant that I was going to be a pastor. We called it a choir director in that time.
yeah.
It was going to be a youth leader or be a missionary. That's what it meant to me back at that time. And I really just couldn't get settled on one of those. So I prayed and I said, God, if you want me to do one of the things, make it clear. If not, I'm going to go to the university, 4 year university. I'm going to get a business degree and management and business management. So I didn't have a confirmation about one of those three. Um, Later, I discovered that God did call me into full-time ministry. He allowed me to serve him in something that I really, really love to do. And when I connected those dots, I thought, how cool is that? That God is allowing me to serve him, Lord, during Monday through Friday in my work.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are still struggling with that. I struggled with that also. I don't think I clued into that until I was at least 30 years old, that the business was a ministry. And I think some of us, my father was a business guy turned pastor. And so that was the model I had was, hey, if you're all in for God, you work for the church or you're a missionary, just as you described. And I also had that revelation. And I bet a lot of people listening are having that as you talk or have had it. And so I just think that's a great thing to reinforce here is we're all in ministry. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
who the employer is. It's our own company that God owns the church and he owns all our businesses anyway. So
We're just stewards, right? We're not going to take anything with us.
exactly.
But
Okay. So you get out, sorry, finish your thought.
Randy Alcorn said, you can't take it with you, but you can send it on ahead.
We've had him on the podcast, and that is
Yeah.
my favorite line of his. To me, that is his calling, is to deliver that line as many places in many ways as possible, which is fantastic. So, okay, let's go back. So now you get out of school with a business degree, and what's the first job out of college?
Well, ironically, I graduated in December of '79. So 1980, we're on the threshold of a recession. We did go to a recession in the early '80s, but I was looking for a job. I was a total introvert. I'm an introvert by nature, but really just not outgoing, and all that. And so I graduated and started looking for a job, and no one was hiring, or at least they weren't hiring me. And I just worked odd jobs. I refereed ball games. I worked with my hands. I did some outdoor things, whatever I could do to make money. I was married at this time, and my wife had a very good job, and we were living with her parents as a recent college grad. And so that was very humbling to have your in-laws basically providing your housing and your wife's providing benefits and salary with a little bit of addition that I had contributed. And so fast forward about 8 months later, I had a headhunter that was calling up new startup companies. And he called this company called Eastern Industrial Supplies. And it was three guys who had broken away from a competitor who had been bought out by a national chain. And after about 18 months, they thought that they just needed to try having a supply house themselves. And they were in the market for their first sales trainee. And so I was that person. They made me an offer, went to work with them September 1st of 1980. By the way, that was Labor Day. And like yesterday, it was a holiday, and they paid me. So I thought, this is a pretty good company.
Right.
But we had about six employees. That was the original group. They had 3 support staff and 3 of the owners. And so that was my entry. I was just great. I was grateful to the Lord I had a job. You know,
Wow.
I still made a pittance compared to what my wife made, but I was just grateful to have an opportunity, and I just loved everything about the business.
So tell us about the business. I'm sure it's changed a little over the years. And by the way, 44, congratulations, 44 years at the same.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people listening to this have the same or working for the same company that their first job, a real job, okay, shall we say, out of college. But that's a feat in itself. But obviously, you have to like it to do it that long. But tell us a little about the business, because we got a lot of business folks listening to this. What kind of products? I know there's some plumbing things, and I'm sure it's expanded over the years. But maybe you just talk a little about the business.
Well, we're wholesale. We're in the wholesale trade. We're actually a wholesale supplier, and we're in the pipe, valve, fitting, plumbing space.
Okay.
So actually, you know, the wholesale trade is a very important trade. The world stops without what we do, right? Because you can't repair equipment, machinery, and build new plants without having the supply that we have in the local markets. So we sell carbon and stainless as well as some plumbing products, but mainly 90%, 85 to 90% of what we do is pressurized systems. So whatever the median might be in the temperature will determine what type of product it will be. But you know, people will move steam and chemicals, high pressures through this piping, excuse me, throughout their plants, and then they'll just be able to buy all the associated products that go with it.
Gotcha. So anything that moves things through pipes, it sounds like, and valves and keeps the liquid. So what is a typical industry that you're selling into?
Oh, well, for instance, we sell a lot into chemical applications where they need stainless steel pipe. We sell a lot into the tire industry in South Carolina. So there's a lot of tire manufacturers here. And anywhere you see vapor coming out of a building, it means that they have something that's generating steam there, whether it's a boiler or hot oil or something. And there's a tremendous amount of piping.
Okay. And now over this many years, 44 years, you've seen a lot of change. And tell us again what had happened here right before you had entered with the 3 guys that are kind of partnered.
Yeah. So I went to work with 3 men. I knew nothing about pipe, valves, and fittings. And I learned a lot from those men. I learned a lot of things about products and how to sell. I also learned a lot of things that were not so good.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we're all products of the world we grew up in. And I went into an environment which was opposite of the environment that I grew up in. So they were just different. They operated different, and they had different values. And so after a couple of years, I just became miserable in my journey.
Mm.
And I really wanted out of there. I wanted to be better aligned. We called it an environment in those days, but today we call it culture.
Yeah.
And I was just looking for a better environment to work in. I love the business aspect, and I love what we did. Maybe I just didn't appreciate who I did it for. And we had gone into a recession now at this time, and certainly no one was hiring. So I don't know how many resumes that and letters that we typed. Back then we had to type up manually on an electric typewriter all of our resumes and all those things and letters and send those out. And I don't know how many hundreds I sent out of those, but I just couldn't find a job. And I didn't really realize that God was teaching me perseverance. I felt like there were many days that I was hanging on. I was just so miserable. And I said, God, why is this happening? Why am I really going through this? I'm wasting my life. I want a job where I could just grow and have opportunities. And I see no future here, because we would, when things were good, they were good. But when they were bad, they were bad. And we hired a lot of people and let a lot of people go. And I was on the end that had to let the people go, even though I didn't necessarily hire them. And I didn't know any better. I just did what I was asked to do. And so I didn't realize that God was going to give me that company. 6 years after I went to work, God literally put that company in my lap. And then later, as I began to think about our own mission and core values, as me being the president and CEO and primary owner, our 5 core values that really have carried us since that time really were birthed through the early 80s, and that perseverance that I had to do. I didn't know that God was putting me through that to develop those values, as well as just to build my character. God had to really work, and he continues to work on me to build that character.
Okay, now I want to get into those values if you're willing to share them, but let's go back just a moment. 6 years after you start this, pretty much fresh out of college, somehow you get control of this business. Tell us about how that went down.
So we had 3 owners. After a few years, 2 bought out one, and then we started another company. It was more of a similar products, but more of precision, specified product, specialty products in the space that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm BC, by the way. I'm before computers, and I'm before fax machines. I'm before email, where you could send bids, and you had to hand deliver those things, go pick up bids, hand deliver, go call on customers, try to get your product specified. So it was really kind of 2 different businesses.
Okay.
Very different, very similar, but very different. So one owner took one, and one took the other, and that was in November of 1985.
Okay.
Well, the guy who originally hired me, he was taking the Eastern Industrial Supplies, the pipe valve fitting company. And from there, he said, "Hey, I want you to come with me." And he gave me just enough stock so that I wouldn't leave. And basically, I was handling sales and distribution, and he was finance and the president. So he handled those kind of things. And then April of 1986, he was in his 60s, and he walked in and laid a stack of papers on my desk. And I said, "What is that, George?" And he said, "Well, I've been to my attorney, and I've been sick. I have a cough and cold I can't get rid of, and it's coming from fluid buildup around my lungs. There's blood clots lodged in my heart, and they tell me that if they ever dislodge, I'm going to die instantly. So I'm only going to work 4 days a week, 4 hours a day. You're going to be running the company, and I'd like for you to have the opportunity to buy my stock."
Wow. And you're like, how old are you at this point? 28 or
I'm
something?
28 years old. Yeah. I have one child. I'm 28. And I'm thinking, well, what does a 28-year-old think? I think, well, he has a son and some children from a previous marriage. They're in and out of the office. They'll come in, they'll take over. We'll see what happens. Just never even imagined that um, he would ever pass away. So 8 months later, it was December 31st, 11:45 p.m. I'm watching my wooden console TV with my dial on it and watching Dick Clark in New York Square,
Right.
watching the ball drop, rocking my now second child. I'd had a son a couple of months before that, and I received a phone call that from a friend of his that he had passed away from a massive heart attack, that the company was mine, and that they would talk to me next week. And got my wife up. We cried and prayed all night long. Didn't
Wow.
know what we were going to do, and that was quite a load on a 29 year
I was
old
gonna
guy
say, wow.
who could never have started a company like that, and certainly didn't have the funds to start a company. But it was one of those things set up where if I just started making monthly payments to his estate based off a previously devised formula about how the company would be valued, then as long as I wasn't 10 days late or more on those payments, I retained the phantom voting rights. And we were able to pay it off sooner than the number of years that was there. But it was always that pressure. You had to make that payment, and you had to keep the company profitable. So there was a lot of debt because when the two companies had split, Eastern Industrial had assumed a lot of the debt because the other company was given their inventory, and our owner wanted to keep this new building he had just built, but it didn't have any equity in it. So anyway, it was not a great business deal, but it was good for me because God was teeing it up to give me the PVF company.
But at least he had done some planning, you know?
Yes.
So even if
Right.
the financials maybe weren't amazing, what comes to my mind, we deal with a lot of business owners in transition, or, all businesses are going to be in transition eventually, right? So you always have to have a succession plan. And so I give the guy credit. I mean, for at least putting a plan in place that you could execute. Do you feel that way,
Yeah.
or was it?
Yeah. Yeah, that was some of those things I really learned a lot that were really good from him and from
Yeah.
some of the other guys about how to run a business.
Yeah.
People part could be improved, but basically how to
Right.
run a business, good business practices, principles, and so that was one of them. He was a planner. And
Yeah, at least the planning was done well. The culture sounds like needed to make a turn, and I,
yeah,
I I hope we can get into that. Okay, so all right, here you are, 28,
yeah,
29 years old. You own this business. You didn't ask to own it necessarily. What a unique situation. We've had another gentleman on in a similar situation, Mike Richter, in the accounting business. He had a very similar situation, and it just feels like kind of God prepared him in that way for you. So take us through this now. Now that you have control, now maybe you can affect the culture more meaningfully. And of course, this is the Generous Business Owner podcast. How did you start to wake up to the fact that this was a ministry, and what happened next as you took control?
yeah. Well, when the company split in November of '85, I had a lot more control over the culture.
Right.
And so God kind of gave me a little runway into that. Um, and so out of that really came some operating values. Those five values were caring, integrity, honesty, self-responsibility, and being positive. Those were all things that I felt like that we needed that we didn't have
Yeah.
that would sustain us. So no matter what our sales were, if we were able to accomplish that, then those five things, based on where we came from, that we would be foundationally strong. And so from there, I honestly, Jeff, once I realized the amount of debt that the company was in, it was over $1 million, and we were
Wow.
only 3 million in sales.
Yeah.
And as once I did that, and someone helped me, a CPA helped me kind of dive deep into that and understand where we were and what we needed to do. Um, it was just keeping my head down, taking one step at a time. I went to a number of banks and they would look at our review and they'd say, "Oh, Mr. Miller, come back and see me next year," and hand it back to me.
Mhm.
So we couldn't borrow money. Probably a good thing a 29-year-old can't borrow money. We just have to keep our head down. And God saw to it that no one in the company left. George had a meeting with everybody and said, "Hey, Kip is," he actually said, "Kip has agreed to buy my stock," which it was a buy-sell agreement that I had the option, but he told me
Right.
it's going to. So anyway, we did that. So no one left, everyone
Right.
stayed. And we just started slowly making $50 a month. And then we might make 100 or we might make 500. And it was just really, really a slow journey. And
Yeah.
I felt the pain when we were on credit hold and you didn't find out until the material didn't come in, and you would call the salesperson at the company and say, "Oh, you need to talk to credit department. Oh, well, we're on hold." So we had that happen a lot in the early to mid 80s. And I just vowed one day we're going to be out of debt. We're going to be debt free. We're not going to have this hanging over our head and have people come and say, "Man, I hear you guys are in bad shape. The rumors going around, you're going to go bankrupt." Well, we better not go bankrupt because I don't have a life if we do that. But yeah, that was just tough. I kept my head down,
Yeah.
continuing to try to pay the bills. And honestly, I was raised as a believer. I made a profession of faith at 9. I didn't understand everything about atonement at that time. I made those connections later in my high school years. But yeah, just thinking about um, the commandments and things, but not really applying them to my work life. That pretty much the culture then, being raised Baptist was, the church was about things you shouldn't do, and
Yeah.
really you don't hear sermons about the workplace. It's about how to act in church. And so I just kept my head down, and it was later that God said, "Hey, I've given you a purpose." And that really kind of flipped a switch for me.
When was that? When did that kind of light bulb go off for you?
I think that was probably, I would say 37, 38, 40ish year old. Uh, I was, I would have some vendors invite me to go to these 1-day power seminars, the power of positive thinking.
Right.
Zig Ziglar, Norman Vincent Peale, Miss Bush would come into town in Charlotte, or Coach K from Duke, and
Right.
it was really teeing up their books they had for sale. But
Right.
you'd have these powerful, positive thoughts that could help your life be better. And at one of these, it was a process to go through. Have you ever written down the purpose for your life? And I had never heard about that concept. Gone to school 4 years and never heard anything like that. Never heard it in church. What purpose do you have? And I really, they teed it up for you. They ask you some questions about yourself you had to answer, and they had all kind of values, your behaviors, and you circled and Xed them, and it became time for me to put my number 2 pencil on a piece of paper to begin to write my sentence in it. And you can call it a voice, a thought,
Yeah.
whatever, but it said, "You have a purpose." And I internally, I said, "What?" "Yeah, you have a purpose. It's to be a Christian businessman in an evil and sinful world."
Wow.
And at that moment, about 10 years after I was given that to write that high school paper, then, I said, "Man, it just gave me so much confidence." And
Like
it
20
was,
years later, I just want to emphasize this point. It sounds to me like 20 years later, you had this opportunity to actually write it down, which always is helpful to me. I'm sure to many of us, to actually that process of writing it. But it was essentially the same thought that God had given you to write 20 years earlier, essentially,
yeah,
in that entrance paper, right, to college.
yeah,
Is that
yeah.
was that and that had to be a heck of a moment.
It was a heck of a moment. And I thought, man, it just gave so much meaning to my life. I
Yeah.
can't begin to describe the feelings that I had, the
Oh
thoughts
man.
that I had. And I truly left there that day energized and a changed person.
Love it.
I said, "God, why did it take me so long?" But I think he was just working on me through all
That's
that
right.
period, right? And he knew what I was going to face, and how he just needed to continue to grow my character and perseverance through all those struggles. And I've had many of those struggles through the
Well,
years.
that was quite a while ago. So,
Yeah.
so now how does that affect your behavior? What is that new journey of sort of now that you've got that recognition? I'm assuming the business has gotten in a little better shape from the debt and the fear
Yeah.
and all of that kind of thing. So, maybe the business is improving. You've got this kind of defined calling. How does that start to, change the business or your behavior?
I think anytime that you understand what your purpose is, then your antennas go up and you start listening more, you start looking more.
Yeah,
And I'm thinking about, what does a real Christian business look like? Because I haven't really seen one.
true. Yeah,
Uh, how am I supposed to run a business that's going to honor God? And really, I didn't even know to ask that question.
right.
So several things happened. A local business here invited me to a FCCI group. It's Fellowship of Companies for Christ International,
Okay.
and they promote having weekly meetings with business leaders to promote Christian business principles. And
Okay.
so they had materials that they would tee up 30 minutes of teaching, and then you would have 30 minutes of discussion about how to glorify God through your work.
Okay.
So that was one thing. And then um, anything that I heard about that had anything to do with Christ at work,
Yeah.
anything that I heard about had something to do with Christ at work, then I was there and I was attending it and I was just trying to soak it up. But there's really not books written about this or many courses that would teach us. So I really just kind of cut my teeth through this FCCI material that they had. So they would have an annual conference and they would have speakers come in. And then from those conferences, they would write out these materials and basically use them for the next year. And that's kind of what we did. I attended the first conference in 2001, and they would invite different business speakers to come in and speak to you about how to operate a company for Christ. And it was just very encouraging, very challenging. And so I was just so grateful to have that opportunity. And so every day is like, okay, how can I figure out how to do this? So in 2002, as the company was growing, I had the company was undergoing an expansion, and a contractor, we just had a few minutes of quiet time. Everyone had left to refresh themselves in the meeting. He said, "Hey, what keeps you up at night?" Just a conversation question. And I said, "Well, we've been doing these surveys and associate surveys, and they say we're losing our small family environment. We were growing. People were moving out of Greenville into these other markets, opening locations for us. So we weren't able to gather in my backyard and have afternoon times that we could just fellowship and cook out." And he said, "Well, man," he said, "a company I used to work for used to have chaplains, and they were part time, and they would come into the workplace." And I said, "Chaplains at work?" He said, "Yeah." And so I said, "Well, if you have the name of that company, would you share it with me?" So I received an email from him, and he sent a link. And so I called that company and had a meeting. And then January of 2002 is when we first kicked it off.
Wow.
So they provide chaplains that come into your workplace. They'll walk through the building. They might stay 45 minutes or an hour. It's voluntary and it's confidential. So they're just there to build relationships and help people live life. A lot of people don't have pastors, so I thought, well, that's going to help us with our culture. So when they rolled it out, they said the program is called Eastern Industrial Supplies Cares. And this is 2002. I'd never seen Cares attached to a company name, a ball team, much less anything, but a company, and that's what they called it. And so as God continued to just kind of work in my life and say, I had a gentleman that challenged me to come up with a with a ministry plan at work and then incorporate it into our strategic plan. And I said, a ministry plan at work? He said, yeah. And then he gave me some information about 100 and something ways to do that. So that was about 2 years after we had started off this chaplain program. So we just dropped industrial supplies and just said Eastern Cares. And so that really was my first ever ministry plan. I didn't know what it looked like beyond that, but the idea was just to come up with one initiative a year and put it into play under Eastern Cares and just began to reach out to people that way. And so that's how we kind of got started.
And are you still doing that kind of thing today? Do you still have a ministry plan, and how has that evolved over the last 20 years?
Yeah, I still do. There's a lot of ministry that's done under it, but it's grown into this thing that's really become our brand. If there's a tagline, it's Eastern Cares.
Wow.
Some people, when they remit to us, they'll put Eastern Cares
Wow.
company name. So yeah, so that just kind of is who we are. It's kind of the way that we go to market. We try to be intentional about our faith. We don't knock anybody over the head with a Bible, but we're not ashamed of it either. And we really kind of doubled down on that the past couple of years of living out our faith at work and in our marketplace to continue to have that kingdom impact, not just within our company, but also out of it. So there's really 4 areas that we really try to care for, and we call it our 4 C's. Number 1, we want to care for those in our company, right? Our people. We have to care for them over and above anybody else. They're our work family. They come first, providing chaplains, providing training, helping them become the best version of themselves that we can. We have a lot of initiatives that are under caring for those in our company. Then we care for our community. Whatever community that we go into, we want it to be better because we're there. We can't do everything, we can do something. So we encourage our associates in that particular area to get together, to do some extra work in the community, and we give them time off to do it. If it's a work day, then we give up to 5 days off a year, exclusive of a vacation or PTO, so that they can do good works in their community.
Cool.
And then we care for our country. Whenever there's a national disaster, we have funds available that we can rapidly respond and provide what we need, what's needed there. And the last C is cultures. Really, that incorporates everybody else in and around this country, around the world. So we've had a unique partnership with some indigenous folks in Tanzania. They actually bought some property and
Wow.
built some lands. We built an orphanage there with indigenous leaders. And today there's an orphanage, there's a children's home, and now there's a secondary school that's all been built out of this 17-year partnership with indigenous Tanzanians. So our company provides most of their support, a good bit of their support on a monthly basis. And a number of our people have gone there on trips, and a lot of our people actually get extra to them through payroll deduction.
That's amazing. I love that intentionality of it's such a great story of just the inspiration, how God kind of gave you this business and trained you up, and then how you gave you the kind of lightning bolt assignment to do the ministry intentionally in the business, and now the way you've kind of got this set up. I think that's just amazing. Now you're kind of at the age where we talked about the planning for the next generation earlier. Have you gone through that, or is that something you can share about kind of how you think about the next generation taking over eventually for you?
Yeah, I have a older daughter and a son, and my older daughter's son-in-law who are in the business. And so I really thought the torch was going to be passed to my older daughter. We went through this thing called COVID, and she has 3 children. And so she basically had to be a stay-at-home school teacher.
Wow.
And we had been prepping her to be president. And she came in one day and she said, Dad, I don't think I can be president. I said, why? She said, I can't be all in. My children are going to need me. I realize that now more than ever. And I said, well, I've never experienced all the emotions that I've had around COVID. And I said, so don't make any decision right now. Give it a couple of months and then come back and let me know what you think. So pray about it. So she came back in 6 weeks and said, Dad, I'm more convinced than ever that I can't be all in. She said, Caleb, her husband, he works here too. And he was one of our top salesmen. And she said, one of us is going to have to dedicate more time to the children. And I said, okay. So that really kind of put me back a couple of years in my plan.
Right.
And so we were at what I was doing is I was looking for someone who had a biblical worldview, who could help our family walk us through transition, help us determine what we're going to do with the company, what was important to Kim and I, what were our desires, and just do all that groundwork, all that foundational work to helping us with senior level structures, with a plan, a successorship, a transition plan, because there's a lot more than just me making the decision.
Right.
My wife and I, but there's a lot of other people here, senior leaders who have really helped grow the company and feed my family. You have to consider all of these individuals in this process. And so we went through the process. We hired a company, Ron Blue Trust. They have a family office in Atlanta. And one of the things they specialize in is in transition and succession planning, strategic planning, and going deeper with your culture. So it really fit all the desires that my wife and I had. So we met with them at one of the FCCI conferences, and they came on board with us in 2021. And we just began with taking surveys, answering questions. And we continue with them even to today. They have a group that also works with families around financial planning. So each one of my children and their spouses works with this group, because I wanted them to make sure they had, financial plans, budgets, that they had insurance, all the things that they needed in life, and then have somebody they can lean into as they grow up, as they continue to mature, that they'll have a financial advisor, an independent person. So really, Ron Blue came in, and there was a transition during that time where one of the lead people that were used transitioned over to Sovereign Capital, which is, I think, owned by the same principal.
Mm-hmm.
And wanted to start a family kind of focus there on Christian families. And so we just didn't miss a beat. We just God just continued to put people in our path, and people who had helped us along the way. And we created so many different plans, including a family mission statement, family covenant, family foundations, to a family document, a covenant about what were mine and Kim's desires, my wife, and then down to things like what are the requirements if a grandchild wants to come to work, and what are the expectations, and what can they expect, etc. So that document is created. It's going to be a continual work in process. One of my family members, my daughter, owns that, so it is continually updated at our family meetings, which we have 2 or 3 family meetings that are facilitated by an outside person. Ron Blue Company facilitates these meetings, and it really gives everybody a safe space to say what they think and have input. And even the spouses who aren't in the business are at those meetings, and they have a say so. Matter of fact, we all sat around the table and we went through all the options that we had about what to do with the company. And so the biggest question I had to answer, and really it just stayed with me, stewardship standpoint, was what was I going to say to God when I was in heaven? He said, "What did you do with what I gave you?" Well, I sold it and gave the money away, or I gave it to my children and they ruined the business. What was I going to say? And after struggling with that and talking with people for a couple of years, I came to determination was either way would be biblically fine. I could choose either one. So that kind of settled that part. But I had seen so many of my friends, competitors in different markets, who had sold their business to a larger national chain or venture capitalist. In every case, that company became a shell of itself. And I did not want to see what God had built through our stewardship. I didn't want to sit on my front porch and see Eastern become like one of those companies. I wanted it to continue to thrive and to grow. And we looked at all the options: selling the company, ESOP, giving part of it away to a nonprofit, giving them 50% of the profits a year, 50% back into the company to grow it. We looked at all the options. At the end of the day, we determined that we were going to continue this as a family-owned company.
Yeah.
Primarily because of being able to employ people and giving them a job, but the impact that God has allowed us to have in the marketplace to represent Him, not perfectly, by no means, but to represent Him and to point people to Christ and connect people to Christ. So I wish I could have said this when I was a young man at 29, that today, the biggest win for me is when somebody connects to God, reconnects or connects for the first time. That's the biggest win.
Yeah.
I'd like to have said that sooner in my career, but I just didn't understand it.
Well,
but today it's important.
It's an amazing journey that God's taking you on, and I just love hearing all of this. And of course, one of my big kingdom assignments came when I was sitting with Ron Blue, who's a mentor of mine, and in 2010, we're sitting together in a coffee shop, and he said, "I heard God say, I want you to scale what this guy started." And so when we started Arcos 8 years ago, what God's done is bring us basically create a multifamily office that helps business owners in transition. And the way I look at it is doing this podcast and just giving back to this community. I kind of use the Elon Musk analogy. Forget the personality or maybe even the business, but when he started Tesla, he said, I've got Tesla, it's an electric car company, but I want everybody to drive electric cars, and I hope Ford and GM and everybody else. That's how I look at this. My calling is to help high capacity people uncover their God-given calling and give them oxygen to live it out. And so we just mostly do that at work through our multifamily office. But I would love to just expand the market for people thinking the way God's taken you through to think about their business, to steward it in a way that honors Him. Yeah. And I want Ronald Blue Trust to do well. I want the family office there to do well. I want my friends from the wirehouses all those years to do well. I want them to serve more people. I want there to be more demand for this kind of thing that you had demand for in sort of our industry, if you will, of wealth management. So I know Arcos God has already more than taken care of them and will continue to do that. And that's important to us. But we just want to expand the market for people to think this way. And you've done a great job of helping our listeners think that way today. But Kip, as we wrap up, we always try to ask one final question, which is obviously you're way down the path on this. And there's probably some 40-year-old you 25 years ago listening to this, kind of on the precipice of what direction to go. with their business, what's just a practical tip that can maybe they can apply tomorrow that moves them in the right direction?
So when I started attending these Friday morning FCCI groups back in 2001, there was a guy named Steve Campbell who was a regional director, and I was started leading these groups in our office. And he walked up to me one day and he said, "Hey, I'd like to give you a challenge," with a great big smile on his face. And I said, "Okay." He said, "I want to challenge you to wear Christ on your sleeve a little bit more." And I had no clue what that meant. I had no clue what that looked like. But without that challenge, I don't think I would have taken another step. And so I thought, well, what is he talking about? Do I put the fish on my business card, or what do I do? So again, when there's a challenge or God puts a purpose before you, you begin to think about it, and you're attuned to anything that might correlate with that. And so I just started trying to wear Christ on my sleeve and see what that looked like. And that led to us, having a ministry plan at work. It led to us hiring chaplains. It led to us having a partnership with some indigenous folks in Tanzania. It's led us to do so many more things, even make a decision about the company to keep it for people, right? It's going to be stewarded by my son-in-law, Caleb. He's going to steward the company. It's really important, our culture, and we feel like a family member needs to drive that culture. That's really how do we enhance people and values and faith in our business? So I would just say simply, a practical tip is, what can you do to wear Christ on your sleeve a little bit more at work? And start there. To me, it wasn't done in 12 months. It's been a journey. It's been a journey since those early 2000 years up until today. I continue to learn. I continue to be thirsty for it. I continue to want to wear Christ on my sleeve. But for me, it's been a journey. So I just say, take that step in that journey.
Well, thanks for issuing that same challenge that you got years ago, and to be bold. I love that as a summary. And well, Kip, thanks so much for being with us this week. Was so thankful for you sharing your story.
Well, it's God's done it, and we just give him praise for it. And we just always like to share because we want to encourage other people. I need it, and other people need it.
All right. Well, thank you, Kip, and thanks everybody for joining us on this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. Subscribe and share it with a friend. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.